Hey everyone, it is Kevin Henry. I am the founder of the Dental Assistant Nation podcast and so glad you're back with me. I'm going to start this week with an apology to you. I had several of you reach out because there was not a new episode last week. One of the things that I pride myself on here at Dental Assistant Nation is making sure that dental assistants, you all have some kind of resource to start your week. So every Sunday, I want to try to launch a new podcast. I want to try to bring somebody on. I want to try to bring something to you that motivates you, excites you, gets you ready for the week ahead, as well as reminds you just how amazing you are and the awesome responsibility that you have every day. Last week, I failed you, but I have a good excuse, and that's what I want to talk about a little bit this week. Thursday morning, flashback to a week ago. Again, I always put out the podcast on Sunday. So a week ago, Thursday, I woke up to text messages, missed calls, everything else from my mom and from my daughter, that my dad had suffered a stroke. Now, I live north of Denver, Colorado. I'm originally from Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's where my mom, my dad, my daughter, and her husband all live. So, you wake up at 6:30 in the morning and you realize that your life has changed a little bit. And you realize that whatever you had planned for that day suddenly isn't important because you have a family member who needs you. And you have a group of family members that need that support, and we all needed to be together. So I hopped on a plane Thursday as soon as I could from Denver to Tulsa, got to the hospital Thursday night, and I can thankfully say, as we sit here and I record this podcast, that my dad has made almost a full recovery. Whatever stroke he had was thankfully very minor, but at the time it was not. Whenever I first got there, he was on a ventilator. He was on a feeding tube. He was unconscious for about 48 hours. And there was a time Saturday morning that when the doctor was being very honest with us, and she said, this could go one of two ways whenever we remove the breathing tube. Either he's going to be able to breathe on his own and everything's going to be okay, or he's not going to be able to breathe on his own, and we need to decide what the next course of action is. I am very thankful that he did breathe on his own. I'm very thankful that the next day he did not know who I was, but some of those neurons were starting to fire again. We could tell he was starting to recognize various objects in the room, tell us what they were. The very next morning, on Monday, I walked in and he said, "Hey, Kevin." And I have to admit, I broke down a little bit because you go from your dad being on a ventilator one day to him not knowing who you are the next day to him all of a sudden recognizing you and being able to kind of tell you that life history that you have with him. It was a roller coaster. But all that being said, obviously this podcast, while it means the world to me, while dental assistants, you all mean the world to me, I have a motto, and my wife and I share this motto, and it is family first, always. So family always comes before anything else. And last week, family came before work. I'm also the editor-in-chief for Dr. Bicuspid. It came before work. It came before podcasting. It came before a lot of things that I thought were important heading into Thursday, and you look back and you realize that they're really not. So my apologies to you. But like I said, I feel like I have a pretty good reason. And I know heading into the 4th of July holiday that there was a lot of festivities on your mind, hopefully, and I hope you had a great 4th. And a good long weekend, and that you're ready to tackle things on Monday. So I tell you that story and I tell you everything because it was a reminder to me that we all have things that are more important than what we do every day to earn money. It was a reminder to me that family always comes first. It was a reminder to me that whenever somebody needs us, it's okay to put everything aside and be there. So dental assistants, that's kind of what I want to talk to you about this week is that, I come to you every week and I remind you, you're the heartbeat of the practice. You're the soul of the practice. You're the backbone of the practice. And my joke is always, if you don't show up for work, it's a bad day in the practice. And so many of you laugh with me and you nod your head because you know it's true. You've walked in after a Saturday when your doctor's been in there by himself or herself and it looks like a small tornado has hit the operatory. That happens. But you also have a responsibility to those who you love, those who you have in your inner circle. And for some of you, I know that there is no family. I know that maybe you've cut yourself off from your family. I know that maybe it is your friends that is your family circle. It is a pet that may be your family. There are a lot of things that we call family today besides just mom, dad, sister, brother, daughter, son, wife, husband. There's a lot of things that we call family. And I'm right there with you. Even though I'm very close to my mom and my dad, they're both still living, and I'm so thankful for that. And I'm close to my daughter. My wife and I have an amazing relationship. I'm blessed beyond measure, trust me. But I also consider some of my dearest friends family as well. And if they needed something, I would be there in a heartbeat for them, just as much as I would my mom, my dad, my daughter, whoever that is. So I want to talk about just for a minute about work-life balance. And I want to talk for just a minute about how we achieve that whenever others are depending upon us at work. Now, I'm lucky enough that in my job at Dr. Bicuspid as their editor-in-chief, I told my boss what was going on, and he said, you know what? You go take care of that. We're going to be okay here. We'll be fine. You focus on your family right now because that's what's needed. And I know not all of you are in that situation. I know not all of you have a boss that would be that forgiving. Even if your dad had suffered a stroke or a family member had gone through a medical emergency. I know also not all of you have the means, the abilities, the freedom, shall we say, to pack up and just head from one city to another whenever something is needed. So I take all this with a little bit of grain of salt. But I've also talked to a few dental assistants in the week plus that I've been quiet here on the podcast, not only catching up on what's going on as we start the second half of the year, and that's a whole other topic, but just about how you all would handle a medical emergency within your family and your work situation. And I got a mixed range of emotions. Some told me that certainly there are other dental assistants in the practice that would take over. So it was okay to leave. They had very amazing bosses that would understand if they needed to go. And then there was the other side of the equation. There's a friend of mine who works up in the New England area. And what she told me was that she is the only dental assistant in the practice. And so if she suddenly has to leave to fly to another part of the country to be with a family member, that dental practice has to hire a temp. They have to find a temp. There's a lot of things that go into replacing her in the practice. So it's easy for some and it's not for others. And some of you may find yourself in that situation where you feel like if something happened on Monday, you could walk out of the practice and be gone for a few days. Some of you do not feel like that. My encouragement to you is this. I've told you dental assistants whenever I've been at the Florida dental meeting, whenever I've been at Pacific Northwest, the PNDC, Hinman, Chicago, wherever I've been this year, I always look ahead to the second half of the year. And we are in the second half of the year now. And I always talk about things that I want you to do in your practice for the second half of the year, like your setting of goals, your checking in, those stay interviews that we've talked about, where you talk about how the first half of the year has been and what your goals are for the second half, all that. And you can listen back to previous podcasts and you kind of hear my thoughts on that. But here's something I want you to add to the equation, and it never hit me until this week. Have you had that talk with your boss about what would happen if I needed to be gone for a week, 2 weeks, a couple of days, whatever it is, to take care of a family member who suffered a medical emergency? I think back to COVID and the pandemic in 2020, and I know we don't like to talk about that. We certainly don't like to think about the shutdown and everything else that happened in our country back then. But I also think back to how many dental assistants did not go back to the practice because they were afraid of what they would bring home to their family members. And I remember there was a big discussion about aerosols and airborne particles, and were we going to infect our family members when we came home from working in dentistry? And that was a big topic 4 years ago. And many of you who listen to this at that time put your family members first because you chose to maybe wait a little bit before you went back to the practice. You weren't there when it opened back up, but you maybe went back in October, November, December, whenever we knew more about COVID, whenever we knew more about this pandemic and what it would mean moving forward. So you made that choice then. What about the choice now? What about that choice if you would need to be gone? Have you had that discussion with the dentist, with your boss, if you work at a DSO, whatever your working situation is, about how you would take time off? Is it okay? How you need to check in? How you need to communicate with things? Who do you need to help get you on schedule? Let's say that you're working with practice and there are other dental assistants there. How would you explain to them how to get everything taken care of for that day's schedule if you're suddenly not a part of it? These are all situations that I think that we don't like to talk about, and we certainly kick the can down the road sometimes and think, oh, I don't need to worry about that right now. Everybody in my life has good health. I'm in a great spot, but things happen quickly. Right before my dad was taken to the hospital on Thursday, earlier that week, I'd received news that a friend of mine's family member was in a horrific car crash and was in the hospital back in Oklahoma as well. We don't know what life's going to bring us. So I am a big proponent of being prepared for whatever that might be. And that includes us having discussions about when this happens, not if, but when this happens, what do we do? And I think that if you haven't had that as a team, I think that that's a good thing for you to bring up as we start the second half of the year. I think it's always a great idea for you to have that knowledge in place so that whenever you do need to step away for a few minutes or a few days or a few weeks, how do you handle that? And is everybody on the same page whenever it comes to that? So that's my biggest piece of advice to you today, is to be prepared. Expect the unexpected. Know what to do when something like that were to happen. But also, don't just do that for yourself. Communicate that. Have those discussions. Talk to the dentist, your hiring manager, your office manager, whoever is your direct supervisor, about planning for a scenario where you would need to be gone for a little bit. And again, I know we don't like to think about this. I know we always think that our family members are going to be fine, that our pets are going to be fine, that, we're never going to be in a car crash, whatever it might be. But I still think it's important for us to have those plans in place. Just like we train for medical emergencies in the practice, we can plan for what happens when a medical emergency happens outside of the practice as well. So I hope that you are having an amazing week ahead. I hope that you will make some plans for your second half of the year, not only what your goals are, what your hopes are, what your dreams are, but also what happens whenever that roadblock comes up, that you have to put those things on hold for a little bit to take care of maybe what's more important in your life, whether that's a family member, a friend, a pet, whatever that might be. I thank you so much for understanding. Hey, I want to thank you all because so many of you listen to this podcast every week. And so many of you make this podcast possible because you know that this is where you get some boost. This is where you get that little bit of love to start your week. And I could not be more grateful to you for listening and sharing it. So, if there's one thing that you could do to kind of help me celebrate my dad's recovery, to help me celebrate the start of the second half of the year, it is give us those 5 stars if you like what you're hearing, wherever you get your podcasts. Tell your colleagues about us. Make sure to share this. If you found something valuable in here, as we talk about work-life balance and what to do when, share that, because I think more dental assistants need to know that they're not alone out there and that somebody is actually making sure that they have that knowledge that they need. So let me just wrap up by saying once again, thank you. Thank you, dental assistants, for what you do every day, the impact you make on your patients, the impact you make on your practice, the impact you make on your bottom line. You are loved, appreciated, and applauded more than you will ever know. And I'm glad to be one of those people out there who, as I travel around, I will be cheering you on and letting you know just how amazing that you are every day. And speaking of work-life balance, I want to tease something real quick. We are starting July as I record this podcast. I am less than 2 months away from a return trip to South Africa to speak at the South Africa Dental Association annual meeting, to talk to the dental assistants who are down there. We are going to be doing a lot on drbicuspid.com, on that. You're going to see videos, you're going to see interviews, you're going to see kind of my journey. And I'm going to do a lot on the Dental Assistant Nation as well about my trip to South Africa, the lessons I learned there, how it was for me traveling to and from Denver, Colorado to Johannesburg, South Africa, and what that looks like in a world where we know that, we can be anywhere that we want to be. And what an amazing world we live in, right? So until next week, and yes, if all goes well, I will be back next week, and I hope that you will be as well. This is Kevin Henry, the founder of the Dental Assistant Nation. I am signing off, and you know what I'm doing, as I always do every week? Yeah, I'm wishing you nothing but success ahead.